What's up, Cinephiles? Welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we'll be talking about the Filipino horror film Midnight in a Perfect World, written and directed by Dodo Dayao. This is now streaming on the Upstream PH website. I'll be putting down the link on the description box below. I think it's already available worldwide. This movie is set in a near future Manila, where there are a lot of blackouts happening in the city in random areas of Manila, and we have here four friends played by Jasmine Curtis-Smith, Glaiza de Castro, Falcon, and Dino Pastrano. They all think it's a hoax until one night the lights go out around them. Before I continue with this review, why don't you guys show your support to the channel by hitting that like button and subscribing to us for weekly reviews of movies and TV shows. Joining me in this review is the editor-in-chief of Unreal and my horror junkie cinephile friend, Arman de la Cruz. Hi!
Hi guys, thank you for having me again.
Okay, I purposely invited you because I know this is your type of thing, ambiguous horror movies, right?
Yeah, it's up my alley.
I also have to add that we are doing a non-spoiler and spoiler talk for this one, so later we're going to drop a spoiler warning.
Alright, so I'll do my best not to spoil anything, but my initial thoughts about it, I was challenged by it, which is, I think, to be expected from a film by Dodo Dayao. If you guys have seen Violator, it's quite there. It's similar in the sense that there's consistency there with how things are set up, with how the story is told, or with the director's penchant for non-linear narratives. If you guys liked Violator, I think you guys will like this as well. On the flip side, I've seen a lot of people who didn't like Violator liking this one better. Coming from a person who liked Violator, I also like this one a lot. I think just on the fact that it exists in Philippine cinema, films like these are quite rare. Films that are high concept and films that sort of go beyond what is expected of Philippine horror, which is like a lot of the aswangs and like the white ladies and stuff. So this is a bit more metaphysical, I think, and more existential, but also at the same time it's really political and socially aware as well. We'll talk about those things a little bit more in the spoiler section of this video, I think.
Yeah. In terms of being acquainted with the works of Dodo Dayao, I've only seen the I1 TV series, The Tapes, and that in itself is very well executed when it comes to its technical aspects, the sound editing, the cinematography, and I found those things here in different form, but it's also fulfilling, you know. I kept wishing that I've seen this in the cinema, like Dolby surround sound. Can you imagine? There are some scenes here where it's just pitch black. The only light that's coming is from the smartphones of the characters, and then the musical score, when it comes to building that sense of dread, very far from the cliche horror tropes of Philippine cinema that we are used to, as you've said, because this does not really relate to any jump scares. This is more about building that tension and making you more confused with its very elaborate storytelling. At times it comes off as erratic. I can definitely say that this is not for everyone, especially if you're more of a mainstream viewer, but I am fascinated by it. We will discuss later about the payoffs and eventually when the narrative unravel on the amount of the satisfaction that I get. But this movie, you can look at it at many angles. You've mentioned that this can be a political horror film about EJK, extrajudicial killings. That's the most that I'm going to say for this non-spoiler review. And you can also look at this as some sort of a minimalist horror, because at some point the thriller occurs mostly in this one room. There's a big chunk of that movie, and you can also think of this as some sort of a hallucination, some sort of a acid trip for one of the characters. So if a lot of things don't make sense, I think that's the excuse. When it comes to the supernatural creations, manifestations here, it's fine for me that some things are left unexplained, but just because I'm not the perfect audience for this type of movies, I was wanting more for the script to be more upfront, not to be really blunt, but not to alienate its viewers so much, to be less ambiguous and just a bit confrontational on what it wants to really say. But I definitely understand what this movie represents.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said about it being a little bit more minimalistic, I think that is born out of the fact that they did this for a meager budget when you compare it to like Hollywood like titles. But also at the same time, in terms of narrative, I would agree that there's sort of this kind of song and dance for the creator, for Dodo, of making it a little bit upfront or moving it in a place where it's also a little bit more ambiguous and where you have to decode it as well. So it's a little bit of a balance that he, I think at the very least, struggled to do, because it's really hard to make such a simplistic premise of there's a curfew every midnight and it's already mythologized among society. It's really hard to make something simple yet complex out of that. So I think Dodo really did his part, at least in making it at least intriguing enough for you to be able to sit through it and have a good time.
Now that you mentioned that they're working this on a meager budget, I would really love to see Dodo Dayao have more projects with bigger budget, because this is set in a near future Manila, and it is mentioned in the movie that Philippines has a lot of improvements, and I would love to see them on screen and not just being mentioned. I think the movie could definitely use more budget to up its production values, but you know, in terms of being minimalistic and all, this is already good enough. I just wanna feel that sense of utopia that they're talking about, because it's in the title of the movie. It's midnight in a perfect world. But the direction alone is great for me. Dodo Dayao really utilized the way he frames these characters. A lot of slow tracking here. I would have to commend the cinematographer for that. In terms of disorienting you and giving you a debilitating sense of not knowing what will happen next, I think the movie is really successful with that. And as a sublime political horror, I almost think that Dodo Dayao constructed this movie intentionally to gain more repeated viewings, because that's what I felt after I watched this. Like, I need to watch this again for the second time to catch the Easter eggs and the references and all, which I have noted and will discuss later.
To add what you said about it almost feeling deliberately structured to have a sort of like repeat viewings for some reason. I think all good movies do that, so if anything, that's a testament to how the film came out. Although not perfect, weirdly, it's in the title, Perfect Ruts. It's definitely not the perfect Dodo Dayao film. I am of the opinion that Violator is the superior film. It still ticked all of the boxes for me, at the very least. I give this movie 3.5 stars. I feel like it is really a movie that people who are into ambiguous horror, as you mentioned a while ago, for those people to seek this out, it's really enticing and intriguing, a psychological and political horror.
So I have a lot of cinephile friends that they say that this is one of the best Filipino movies last year, and I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. However, that should not deter people from watching this, because this one is really fascinating, and you know, it's very rare that we come across this some sort of gem in Philippine cinema. I just wish that as a viewer, I am not overcompensating to the ambiguities of the film. But you know what's smart is this movie can get political, but at the same time, it can refute those accusations and say that this is just a fantasy horror film. But I was looking for these narratives to be wrapped up more nicely and something that you can comprehend more.
Even though it sometimes feels it gets lost a little bit with all its metaphors, I think the film really delivered on what it's trying to say. The message is pretty clear. The passion there isn't something you can question, but at the same time, as a viewer, you almost want the movie to feel a little bit more attached to the actual plight that they're showcasing in the film. But again, it's a really good film all around.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I have to add, I felt the confidence here of Dodo Dayao in his storytelling. However, looking at the perspective of the audience, his vision seems to be blurry. But you know, it was never his job to please us. But in terms of having an impact on a storytelling standpoint, I definitely yearned for more. But you know, it's time now to dissect those messages in this spoiler talk. If you guys haven't seen this one yet, pause this video and see this on the Upstream website. So first of all, we are in this so-called perfect world, this utopic world, because the movie poses this question that, are you comfortable on trading this so-called utopic world in exchange of your freedom of being controlled, you know, because they are in a curfew setting here. I think it is implied Philippines in the near future is already conquered by China, because just because of that Easter egg that I've seen, that there is a sign here that is translated both in Tagalog and Chinese. So are we both on the same page with that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
It looks like in this movie world, China has already colonized the Philippines, which is
Yeah.
what is likely going to happen.
And then the narration of the movie here, I think it's non-linear. When we are first introduced to the character of Anthony Falcon playing Glenn, there is this ER scene where someone's being delivered to the ER, and later on we learn that it was actually him. So is this a time loop thing? Is this a premonition for that character? What is your interpretation with that? And with Jasmine's character Mimi standing there, because I thought that Mimi also died because she was taken by this entity, this mimic.
Like, a lot of interpretation is valid, right? But I think I am of the camp that everything that happens in the film is malleable to the point that you can't really tell what's real and what's not, and that's what I like about it. With Anthony Falcon's character, I would say it's more of a premonition as well. And also Mimi's character, right? At some point in the movie, in the tenement setting, right? I would say in my reading, it's a premonition. I think maybe a foresight of what is going to happen to them later in the film.
Do you think that Mimi's character is already dead?
I think so, yeah.
We get that gorgeous shot of the tenement twice, and something tells me that when she visited her stepfather, she's already dead, because I was really keen to what she was wearing. At the beginning of the film, she was wearing a black dress, and then when they were stuck in the safe house, she was wearing this brown dress. Then when we see her again with Glenn, it was kind of presumed that she's the one who brought in Glenn, which is kind of impossible if she's already dead by that point.
Yeah, it's really like jumbled, right? That's really tough, because my main thing about Mimi's character is that after she visited her dad, I am of the opinion that this world, even though it's supposedly the perfect version of the Philippines, they're not exempt from the realities of the world. Depression still exists, melancholia still exists, and it can afflict you still, even if we have great rivers and we have a thriving economy. Those things still exist, right? Jasmine did a really good job with her character in portraying the sadness or the loneliness of her state of being. My reading of that was just because of the way that scene was shot. It could be the implication that she has taken her life or something. So if that's the case, yeah, it would conflict with a shot late in the film where she brought Anthony Falcon's character to the hospital.
Yeah,
so it's really confusing.
I insisted on doing this because I'm the type of person who can't really embrace this ambiguity. Like, I need to give value to this movie by dissecting it as much as I can, as we can. So another thing that I have in here is there is this drug called the Magic Star. By the end of it, those who have taken the drugs will be immune from this monster. It was Jinka who was spared in the early part of the movie, where there's a man in the forest who was gathering liquid from the monster. So I have a theory that Magic Star came from the monster itself. In a way, they're becoming one with the monster, so they are not being attacked by this monster. And also, I have to mention that being Pimentel's character, in her earrings, she also has this Magic Star.
I didn't catch that at all. That bit of the movie was like so hilarious to me, that there's this mention of drugs when it's obviously that the film is trying to reference EJKs and the current war on drugs of this administration. The fact that they decided to focus on middle-class people who are unaffected and unbothered by what's really going on in the country, because they'll continue existing, right? Even if like the war on drugs is happening. Like, for example, right now the quarantine restrictions are set. I mean, you still see a lot of people going outside and partying and everything. So the fact that they focused on this, it's almost like a two-pronged sword. On one hand, it misses the point a little bit by focusing on them, because it feels a little detached from what it's trying to say. They're not the people who face the horrors of what's happening in the Philippines, right? At the same time, there's a certain level of catharsis in seeing these people going through this, because they went out of their way to check if this was a hoax, right? If the curfew is actually fatal, or if the curfew is actually harmful to the person who dares to defy it. There's a little bit of catharsis in that, in seeing that these people would be so foolish enough and be so inside their bubble enough that they don't think their actions will have consequences, right? The drug thing, I thought it was hilarious, but I didn't catch a lot of the things you were saying about it, with being Pimentel's character having the very drug as her ring. That's even more funny to me, yeah.
I just realized this now because you mentioned that you can't really completely relate to these characters because they are middle-class people. And it brought me back to what Big Pimentel mentioned. Like, she mentioned something that she doesn't care what happens tonight as long as they survive. She doesn't care if she don't know a thing of what's actually happening. And I think it speaks about the certain population of the Filipinos who are indifferent to this EJK. And I just realized that maybe Dodo Dayao opted for middle class characters because he wants these characters to be the representation of that indifferent community who has apathy of what's happening around them until it happens to them. What is your interpretation of the safe house here? Because it seems like it's acting like a portal. Sometimes you can get in, sometimes you cannot. And the safe house itself, it's playing tricks on you. They shot this never-ending corridor scene with Jasmine. How did they did that? I think that was brilliantly executed.
That trend is kind of on vogue for films that are of the same ilk, like post-horror, like a lot of pundits call it. Films like this, basically, where structures act as metaphysical objects, where metaphysical things happen. You can almost think that it harkens back to like The Shining. Probably a closer and more recent example, sadly not a good one, I think, was Motel Akasha. So there like a lot of supernatural things happen in the infrastructure, a lot of unexplained things. I just took it really as a metaphor or as a reference to, I think, martial law.
Do you think though that being Pimentel's character is a real person, or is it a manifestation included in the safe house? She's mentioned that she's been there so many times, and then it seemed like at the end like she knows what's behind the door.
There's a high probability that that's the case, or she could just be like an actual asshole who goes out and feels a little bit defiant, so much so that she deliberately goes out during curfew and finds these safe houses, right? There's a lot of different things that could be happening here, but I would say there's a high probability that she's not human, just because of her demeanor, actually. Like, her character is really eerie. We're sort of captivated by this character, but also at the same time you have an immediate sense of distrust. But also, this is the kind of film where everything you can't take at face value, right? So it's really tough to segregate which is an actual thing that happened or an actual thing that exists and which are not, which I guess is part of the fun, right? It's why you're supposed to watch it multiple times before you get like those little details that are almost like jigsaw puzzles where you like put it all together in the whole picture specifically for you.
Either way, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because now that you mention it, I'm going to lean more on my opinion that this character perhaps might be the monster also, because she's wearing a black star and she's wearing all black. So there's a reason why they let her wear this all black, similar to the monster. There's a scene here that it's not shown where Tonichi has gone missing, where he feels like he's been transported into the 70s. He mentions Mobile and a lot of brands back then.
He could very well be transported to the 70s, but at the same time, we're oblivious actually to the actual abilities of the monsters here in the movie. So it could very well be in the 70s, or it could be that monsters or aliens just projected that image for him to confuse him, maybe. I'm off the camp that they're just like tricking with his head, because if he was transported to the 70s, I don't think we would be able to see him towards the end. And also that scene where he's basically just communicating with them through phone, that's scary, because like that's our reality now, right? That's our only way of connecting with other people, to feel safe, maybe to feel some familiarity and reason. That tool is a really important part of our life. It has a dreadful tinge to it, right? The same thing actually, since you haven't watched Violator, there's a scene there involving a cell phone as well. So I don't know if Dodo has an aversion for technology, but it very much feels like it. I feel like it also calls back to a lot of great single location films like Pontypool from Canada. So I think Dodo really did a great job in utilizing everything that you can use in a movie that's set primarily in one location.
Before I let you go, I have few minor details here. I am already nitpicking here, but there is a scene where Tonichi finds a frog with wires inside.
It might be a tool used by the monsters or aliens to surveil people in the Philippines, or maybe it's a Chinese frog surveilling Filipinos. Sadly, we'll never know. It's
but
you
got a good explanation with there. So do you have any more theories you wanna throw?
I think I would just implore people to watch it on Upstream. 200, that's a deal. The entire family can watch, right? So so you don't have to buy overpriced popcorn to watch it in cinemas. But if it plays in cinemas, I would also implore people to watch it.
Yeah.
Every experience to people are different, so it's different to me, it's different to you, it's different to everyone else. I would implore people to just watch it, and the same thing that we're doing right now, dissect it with their friends, because it's really one of those films that there's like a lot of details in it that you can nitpick on. And at the same time, it's a really resonant story that's relevant to what's happening right now, actually eerily so. So if you guys have time, you can watch the replay of our AMA in Unreal's Facebook group. I will give Kevin the link to that if you guys are inclined to do so.
I hope you can bring those series that I have to him, because there is no definitive explanation to hear. Each interpretation is different unless the director and the writer himself, Dodo Dayao, has made his explanation on what happened in all these things. Arman, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you.
Okay, so
thank you.
If you enjoyed watching this video, guys, hit that like button and subscribe to us for weekly content. Also, let us know what you think in the comment sections. Thank you guys so much for watching. Until then, see you on the next one.
Bye.